Betrayal rarely announces itself with a drawn weapon. It usually arrives wrapped in a warm embrace and a soft kiss. When the ruthless heir to a billion-dollar syndicate was confined to a wheelchair, supposedly brain-damaged and paralyzed after a devastating explosion, his enemies rejoiced. His beautiful fiancée played the weeping angel to perfection, spoon-feeding him while plotting to dismantle his empire piece by piece. She thought she was talking to a ghost, a vegetable who couldn't hear her wicked confessions. She was dead wrong. He heard every word, felt every deceit, and was merely waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the sprawling Montauk estate, catching the dust motes dancing in the air before landing on the motionless figure of Alistair Covington. Alistair, the formidable head of the Covington crime family, a man whose mere whisper could dictate the rise and fall of politicians across the eastern seaboard, now sat trapped in a high-tech, customized medical wheelchair. A thin, translucent tube snaked beneath his nose, delivering a steady flow of oxygen, while the rhythmic, monotonous beeping of a heart monitor echoed against the cold marble walls of his bedroom. His eyes were open, staring blankly at a priceless abstract painting on the opposite wall. To the world, Alistair was an empty vessel. The catastrophic car bombing on the Long Island Expressway 3 weeks ago had supposedly severed his spinal cord at the cervical level and caused irreversible traumatic brain injury. The doctors declared him a quadriplegic, locked in a vegetative state, devoid of higher cognitive function. Sitting in a plush velvet armchair beside him was Cecilia Davenport. She was the picture of tragic elegance, wearing a tailored, dark charcoal dress that hugged her slender frame, her blonde hair pulled back into a severe, mournful chignon. She held a damp washcloth, gently dabbing at Alistair's forehead, with a touch so delicate it could break a heart. "He's running a slight fever again, Dr. Miller," Cecilia said, her voice trembling just enough to convey utter devastation. She looked up at the private neurologist standing at the foot of the bed. Dr. Harrison Miller, a man who charged exorbitant fees to keep the Covington family's medical secrets off the books, sighed and adjusted his gold-rimmed glasses. "It is to be expected, Miss Davenport. The body has sustained massive trauma. The autonomic nervous system is struggling to regulate basic functions. You must prepare yourself for the reality that these fluctuations will be his new normal." Cecilia let out a stifled sob, pressing a perfectly manicured hand against her trembling lips. "It breaks my heart, Harrison. Just look at him. He was a force of nature, a titan. And now he's trapped in this shell. Tell me there is some experimental treatment in Switzerland, some surgical procedure in Germany. I will pay whatever it takes." "I am afraid we have exhausted all medical avenues," Dr. Miller replied, his tone sympathetic but final. The blast wave scrambled his neural pathways. "It is a miracle he is breathing without a ventilator. You are doing everything right, Cecilia. Your devotion is commendable. Most women in your position would have moved him to a facility." "I could never," Cecilia whispered fiercely, brushing a stray lock of dark hair from Alistair's forehead. "He is my fiancé. We were to be married next month. I will keep him here, surrounded by the things he loves, until the very end." Dr. Miller nodded, packing his instruments into his leather medical bag. "I will adjust his intravenous nutrient mix. Call the nursing staff if his temperature spikes above 102. Once the heavy oak door clicked shut behind the doctor, the atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The temperature seemed to drop, and the air grew thick. Cecilia slowly lowered the damp washcloth. The trembling in her shoulders ceased. Her posture straightened, and the sorrowful, watery gleam in her eyes vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating sharpness that could cut glass. She stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from her skirt, and walked over to a crystal decanter resting on a mahogany side table. Pouring herself 3 fingers of an incredibly rare Macallan Scotch, she took a long, slow sip. She turned back to look at the man sitting motionless in the wheelchair. "God, you look pathetic," Cecilia murmured, her voice stripped of all its former warmth. It was flat, carrying a venomous edge. She slowly walked toward him, her stiletto heels clicking rhythmically against the hardwood floor. Alistair remained absolutely still. His chest rose and fell in a slow, mechanical rhythm. His eyelids blinked every few seconds, a natural reflex, but his pupils remained fixed and unseeing. "A titan," she scoffed, echoing the doctor's words. She leaned in close, her face mere inches from his, the scent of her Tom Ford black orchid perfume overwhelming his senses. "That's what they called you, the great Alistair Covington. Untouchable, unbreakable. Look at you now. You're nothing but a slab of meat taking up space in my house." She reached out, tracing the sharp line of his jawbone with a single, icy fingernail. "Do you know how exhausting it is, pretending to cry over you every single day? My eyes are completely raw. But it's worth it. God, it is so worth it. The board of directors is terrified. They see me as the grieving widow-to-be, the only one standing between your empire and total chaos. Tomorrow, they are granting me emergency proxy voting rights. Within a month, I will have legal control over the ports, the casinos, and the shell corporations." She paused, taking another sip of the amber liquid. "It's a shame you can't hear me, Alistair. I always wanted to tell you exactly what I thought of you. I despised you from the moment my father introduced us. You thought you could just buy me, buy the Davenport name to legitimize your filthy, blood-soaked money. You treated me like a trophy to be polished and paraded at your charity galas." Cecilia grabbed a handful of his dark hair and yanked his head back slightly, forcing his blank eyes to face the ceiling. "I am not a trophy. I am the woman who finally took down the Covington Syndicate." She released him, letting his chin drop back down to his chest. She turned her back on him, walking toward the grand balcony doors that looked out over the crashing waves of the Atlantic. She had no idea that behind her, Alistair's seemingly paralyzed fingers, hidden beneath the thick wool blanket on his lap, twitched with terrifying, deliberate control. Deception was an art form Alistair Covington had mastered long before he ever met Cecilia Davenport. In the criminal underworld, showing weakness was a death sentence. But manufacturing a weakness, creating a flawless illusion of vulnerability, was the ultimate weapon. Alistair was not paralyzed. He was not brain-damaged. The bombing had indeed been brutal. It had thrown his armored Mercedes SUV off the highway, flipping it 3 times before it erupted into flames. He had suffered 3 broken ribs, a hairline fracture in his collarbone, and a severe concussion. But his spinal cord was entirely intact. The moment he had woken up in the chaotic emergency room, surrounded by screaming trauma surgeons, his survival instincts had kicked in. He knew the bomb was an inside job. The route was classified, known only to his absolute inner circle. If he miraculously survived and walked out of that hospital, whoever tried to kill him would simply try again, perhaps with better aim. So Alistair made the most dangerous gamble of his life. He bribed a disgraced, mob-affiliated anesthesiologist to alter his initial brain scans and spinal MRIs, faking a catastrophic injury. He entered a self-induced catatonic state, utilizing intense meditation and pain suppression techniques he had learned years ago from a former military interrogator. He slowed his heart rate, controlled his breathing, and completely detached his mind from his physical reflexes. He became a ghost inhabiting his own body. He needed to know who the traitor was. He just never expected the traitor to be the woman sharing his bed. Later that evening, the heavy oak door of the bedroom creaked open, Alistair maintained his vacant stare toward the window, registering the shifting shadows in his peripheral vision. Footsteps approached, heavier and more confident than Cecilia's. "Is he asleep?" a deep, masculine voice asked. Alistair's internal heart rate spiked, though he forcefully kept his physical monitors steady. He knew that voice. It was Christian Gallagher. Christian was his underboss, his oldest friend, the man Alistair had pulled from the gutters of South Boston and elevated to the highest ranks of the syndicate. "He doesn't sleep, Christian. He just exists," Cecilia replied smoothly. Alistair heard the rustle of fabric, the unmistakable sound of two bodies coming together. Through the reflection of the dark window pane, he caught the movement. Christian had his hands wrapped tightly around Cecilia's waist, pulling her flush against his custom Brioni suit. She tilted her head back, and they kissed. A deep, hungry, desperate kiss that made Alistair's blood boil with a violent, homicidal rage. He forced his muscles to remain entirely limp. It took every ounce of discipline in his body not to leap from the wheelchair and snap Christian's neck with his bare hands. "God, I missed you," Christian muttered against her lips, his hands roaming over her back. "Being in the city, managing the capos, pretending to mourn this bastard. It's driving me insane. I just want to take you away from here. Soon," Cecilia whispered, resting her forehead against his chest. "We are so close, Christian. The proxy rights go through tomorrow. Then we just need to finalize the transfer of the offshore accounts in the Caymans. Once the money is clean and untraceable, we can finally be done with him." Christian pulled away slightly, walking over to the wheelchair. He stood directly in front of Alistair, sneering down at him. "Look at the great boss now. You know, for a second, when I saw the footage of the car burning, I panicked. I thought the explosives expert used too much C4. I thought there would be nothing left to identify, and that would tie up the inheritance in probate court for years." Alistair logged the confession in his eidetic memory. Christian hired the explosives expert. Christian orchestrated the hit. "It actually worked out perfectly," Christian continued, leaning over and mockingly tapping Alistair's cheek. "Having him alive but brain-dead makes the transition of power so much smoother. The old men on the commission pity you, Cecilia. They see a devoted woman holding the pieces together. They have no idea I'm pulling the strings behind you. Don't flatter yourself, darling," Cecilia said, a sharp edge to her voice as she walked over to join him. She slipped her arm through Christian's. "This was my design. I gave you his schedule. I bypassed the security protocols on his vehicle. You just supplied the fireworks." Christian chuckled, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "A match made in hell. How much longer until we can put him out of his misery? Dr. Miller is a moron, but even he might start noticing if Alistair miraculously develops a fatal respiratory infection." "Give me 2 weeks," Cecilia said, her eyes locked onto Alistair's blank face. "Once the funds are secured in our Swiss accounts, I'll take care of it. A simple air bubble in the IV line. It causes a massive stroke, completely untraceable during an autopsy, especially on a patient with profound brain trauma. Tragic, but expected." "An air bubble," Christian mused, sounding impressed. "Cold-blooded. I love it. Just make sure his private security detail is rotated out that night. We don't want Gabriel snooping around." Gabriel Hayes, Alistair's head of security. The only man in the entire organization Alistair truly trusted, and the only man besides the bribed doctor who knew Alistair was faking his condition. Gabriel was the one maintaining the perimeter, secretly gathering evidence, tracking Christian's movements, and waiting for Alistair's signal to strike. "Gabriel is a loyal dog, but he's stupid," Cecilia dismissed with a wave of her hand. "I'll send him to the city to run a useless errand. He won't be anywhere near the estate." Christian leaned down, his face inches from Alistair's. Hear that, boss? 2 weeks. Enjoy the view while it lasts. You built a beautiful empire, Alistair. Thank you for leaving it to us. He spat on the floor next to the wheelchair, turned on his heel, and walked out of the room with Cecilia trailing behind him, their laughter echoing down the hallway. Alone in the dark, Alistair slowly, deliberately closed his eyes. Beneath the heavy wool blanket, his right hand balled into a tight, white-knuckled fist. The muscles in his jaw clenched, veins popping along his neck. The charade was excruciating, but the intelligence he was gathering was invaluable. They had handed him their entire timeline, their methods, and their motives on a silver platter. 2 weeks. They thought they had 2 weeks to steal his fortune and murder him in his bed. Alistair allowed a microscopic, terrifying smile to touch the corner of his lips. They wouldn't even make it to next Sunday. Weeks of playing a living corpse had taken a psychological toll on Alistair, but it had also sharpened his mind into a lethal instrument. He spent his days cataloguing every piece of information Cecilia recklessly dropped in his presence. She treated him like an interactive diary, confessing her crimes, her financial embezzlement, and her visceral hatred for him with startling frequency. She found it therapeutic, a sick way of gloating over a defeated enemy. On a rainy Tuesday afternoon, the atmosphere in the bedroom shifted from tense to strictly business. Cecilia had arranged a meeting with Arthur Sterling, the senior partner of the most prestigious law firm, representing the Covington Syndicate's legitimate holdings. Sterling was a nervous, meticulous man who sweated profusely when dealing with Mafia money. Cecilia guided Sterling into the room, directing him to the small glass table near Alistair's wheelchair. Sterling clutched his leather briefcase to his chest like a shield, his eyes darting uncomfortably toward the motionless Mafia boss. Is he comfortable, Miss Davenport? Sterling stammered, wiping his brow with a silk handkerchief. As comfortable as he can be, Arthur, Cecilia said smoothly, slipping into her grieving fiancé persona with sickening ease. The doctors say he feels no pain. It's just an empty shell. Sterling swallowed hard. Tragic. Simply tragic. I have brought the documents you requested. The transfer of the Cayman Island holdings, the deed to the Manhattan penthouse, and the liquidization of the tech stocks. However, Sterling hesitated, opening his briefcase and pulling out a thick stack of legal papers bordered in blue. The bank in Zurich is being exceptionally difficult. Due to the sheer volume of the transfer, we are talking nearly $400 million, they require biometric authorization. Cecilia's perfect mask slipped for a fraction of a second, her jaw tightening. Biometric authorization. I hold the emergency proxy. I have power of attorney. You do, Sterling agreed hastily, shrinking back slightly. But for international transfers of this magnitude, the Swiss banks have their own protocols. They require a thumbprint from Mr. Covington on the physical transfer mandate, witnessed by a notary. I brought my notary seal, but he gestured vaguely toward Alistair's limp hands. That won't be a problem, Cecilia said coldly. She walked over to a desk, retrieved an ink pad, and brought it over to the wheelchair. Alistair heard the distinct click of the ink pad opening. He realized what she was about to do. If she secured his thumbprint, the $400 million, his ultimate leverage and the foundation of his syndicate, would vanish into an account entirely controlled by Christian Gallagher. He needed to stop her. But breaking character now, with the lawyer present, would ruin the entire counter-operation. He needed Christian in the room when he sprung the trap. He needed them all together. Cecilia knelt beside the wheelchair. She reached under the wool blanket and grabbed Alistair's right hand. Her touch was icy. She pulled his arm out, exposing his pale hand to the lawyer. His muscles are quite stiff, Cecilia lied effortlessly. Rigor from the paralysis. I'll just need to guide him. Alistair kept his arm dead weight. As Cecilia pressed his right thumb into the dark blue ink, a sudden, brilliant idea sparked in his mind. The brain trauma charade allowed for involuntary muscle spasms. He could use that. She lifted his inked thumb and moved it toward the signature line on the heavy parchment paper held by Sterling on a clipboard. Just as his thumb was about to make contact with the paper, Alistair executed a violent, full-body spasm. He threw his shoulders backward, his neck arching unnaturally. His right arm, supposedly limp, jerked forward with brutal, uncontrolled force, violently slapping the clipboard out of Sterling's hands. The heavy wooden clipboard flew across the room, smashing into the crystal decanter on the side table, shattering it into 100 pieces. Scotch and glass rained down onto the Persian rug. "Jesus Christ!" Sterling screamed, jumping back and knocking his chair over. Cecilia stumbled backward, dropping Alistair's hand, her eyes wide with shock. "Harrison!" she shrieked, calling for the doctor. "Harrison, get in here!" Alistair let his body go entirely slack again, his chin dropping to his chest, his eyes returning to their vacant, unblinking stare. He regulated his breathing instantly, though his heart was pounding with adrenaline. Dr. Miller rushed into the room, followed closely by a burly security guard. "What happened? What's wrong?" "He seized!" Cecilia yelled, pointing a trembling finger at Alistair. "He just violently thrashed and threw his arm out. You said he was completely paralyzed." Dr. Miller hurried over, pulling a penlight from his pocket and shining it into Alistair's eyes. Alistair expertly ignored the blinding light, keeping his pupils dilated and unresponsive. The doctor checked his pulse, then his reflexes with a small rubber hammer. Nothing. It was a myoclonic jerk, a severe involuntary muscle spasm, Dr. Miller explained, his voice shaky as he tried to reassure his furious employer. It happens sometimes in severe neurological trauma cases. The brain misfires a random electrical signal to the muscles. It doesn't mean he has regained consciousness or motor control. It's entirely reflexive, a dying gasp of the nervous system. "Well, fix it," Cecilia snapped, her composure completely shattered. He ruined the documents. Sterling was on his hands and knees, frantically gathering the scattered papers. "The transfer mandate is soaked in scotch, Miss Davenport. The ink is running. It's invalid. I will have to return to the firm, draft an entirely new set of documents, and request a new authorization code from Zurich. It will take at least 48 hours. Cecilia closed her eyes, taking a deep, furious breath to steady herself. "Fine. 48 hours. Have them back here by Thursday evening. Do not fail me, Arthur." As the lawyer scurried out of the room and the doctor administered a fake sedative to Alistair's IV, Cecilia stood over the wheelchair, her eyes burning with a mix of suspicion and hatred. "You always did have to make things difficult, didn't you?" she whispered so softly only he could hear. 48 hours, Alistair. That's all you bought yourself. Enjoy your final 2 days. She stormed out of the room, leaving Alistair alone once more. The room was silent, save for the beeping of the monitor. Alistair waited 10 full minutes. Once he was certain the hallway was empty, he slowly raised his right hand, the one stained with blue ink, and meticulously wiped the ink off on the inside of his pant leg. He then reached beneath the cushion of his wheelchair, his fingers finding the small, encrypted transponder Gabriel had hidden there days ago. He pressed a sequence of buttons blindly. 3 short taps. 2 long taps. 1 short tap. It was a Morse code signal to Gabriel. The message was simple and absolute. The timeline has moved up. We execute the purge on Thursday night. Lock down the estate. No survivors. Alistair settled back into his chair, returning to his statuesque stillness. The game of cat and mouse was over. It was time for the slaughter to begin. Down in the subterranean security hub of the Covington estate, Gabriel Hayes worked in the cool, blue glow of a dozen high-resolution surveillance monitors. The encrypted console on his desk blinked with a sudden, sharp green light. 3 short, 2 long, 1 short. Gabriel, a former Special Mission Unit operator who owed his life, and his daughter's life, to Alistair Covington, didn't smile. He did not visibly react. He simply deleted the transmission log and went to work. The timeline had accelerated, which meant the margin for error had just shrunk to absolute 0. The boss was ready to end the masquerade, and Gabriel was the architect tasked with sealing the exits. His first objective was neutralizing Christian Gallagher's loyalists. Over the past 3 weeks, Christian had subtly filtered his own hand-picked enforcers into the estate's exterior guard rotation. They strutted around the perimeter, arrogant and sloppy, believing Gabriel was nothing more than an incompetent, grieving meathead, mourning a paralyzed king. They had no idea Gabriel had already cloned their burner phones, bugged their barracks, and quietly replaced their reserve ammunition with blanks. Upstairs, the illusion of normalcy continued with sickening sweetness. Wednesday morning saw Cecilia standing by Alistair's bedside, humming a cheerful, upbeat melody as she arranged fresh white lilies in a heavy crystal vase. Lilies, the traditional flower of death. The blatant symbolism was not lost on Alistair, who tracked her movements through the sliver of his peripheral vision. "Gabriel," Cecilia called out gracefully, as the head of security stepped into the bedroom doorway, his face a perfect, practiced mask of solemn duty. "There you are. I was just looking for you." "You asked to see me, Miss Davenport?" Gabriel asked, his voice low and respectful. "Yes. Dr. Miller informed me this morning that Alistair requires a very specific, experimental neuropeptide compound to manage his muscular atrophy. It is highly volatile and cannot be shipped through standard couriers. I need you to drive into Manhattan tomorrow evening to collect it personally from a private laboratory in Tribeca." Gabriel frowned, shifting his weight uncomfortably, playing the part of the fiercely protective guard. "Tomorrow evening? Miss Davenport, with all due respect, I shouldn't leave the perimeter. Mr. Covington is vulnerable. The weather reports indicate a massive storm rolling in." Cecilia let out a long, patronizing sigh, walking over to him and placing a delicate hand on his tactical vest. "Gabriel, look at him. Who exactly is going to attack a brain-dead man in a wheelchair? The estate is a fortress. Christian's men are reinforcing the gates as we speak. This medication is crucial for Alistair's comfort. Are you refusing a direct order from the proxy head of this family?" "No, ma'am," Gabriel said, lowering his head in feigned submission. "I will leave at 6 o'clock tomorrow evening." "Excellent," she smiled, a chilling, hollow expression. "Take the armored Cadillac. It will take you at least 3 hours with the storm. Take your time. Safety first." As Gabriel left the room, Alistair felt a surge of cold, dark satisfaction ripple through his motionless body. She had just cleared the board, exactly as he and Gabriel had anticipated. She was so blinded by her own arrogance, so convinced of her superior intellect, that she couldn't see the steel jaws of the trap snapping shut around her elegant neck. That night, Alistair lay awake in his specialized bed, listening to the muffled, arrogant sounds of Cecilia and Christian in the adjoining guest suite. They were celebrating early, uncorking a bottle of vintage Dom Perignon and openly discussing their future empire. "The old capos in the Bronx are going to be a problem." Christian's voice drifted through the ventilation grate, thick with ambition and alcohol. "They're too loyal to Alistair's archaic rules. No narcotics, no human trafficking. It's bad for business. The Italians are making billions while we play morality police. Then we purge them," Cecilia replied smoothly, the clinking of crystal glasses ringing out. Once the offshore money is in our accounts, we buy the loyalty of the younger lieutenants. Anyone who mentions Alistair's old code gets a bullet in the back of the head. We are modernizing, Christian. We are taking this syndicate global. Every word they spoke was another nail hammered securely into their coffins. Alistair's syndicate was built on a code, a ruthless, violent code, but a code nonetheless that kept the streets from devolving into absolute anarchy. Christian was a parasite, a greedy street thug eager to infect the Empire with cheap, dirty money and chaotic violence. Alistair focused his mind, channeling his icy fury into his muscles, practicing the micro-movements he would need. Beneath the heavy blankets, he flexed his calves, his thighs, his forearms. His body was a coiled spring, rested, rehabilitated in secret, and lethally primed. The doctors said he was a vegetable. Cecilia thought he was a ghost. Tomorrow night, they would learn the terrifying difference between a dead man and a sleeping dragon. Thursday evening descended upon Long Island, enveloped in a torrential, violent downpour. The sky bruised into shades of deep purple and pitch black, while jagged forks of lightning illuminated the crashing waves of the Atlantic Ocean. Thunder rattled the reinforced, bulletproof glass of Alistair's bedroom windows, providing a fitting, operatic overture for the violence that was about to unfold. Arthur Sterling arrived exactly at 7 o'clock, looking even more miserable and terrified than before. His expensive suit was damp from the rain, and he clutched a waterproof briefcase to his chest as if it contained his own beating heart. Christian Gallagher was already in the room, leaning casually against the mahogany mantelpiece with a crystal glass of bourbon in his hand, exuding the smug, untouchable aura of a king in waiting. "Let's get this over with, Arthur," Christian commanded, not bothering to hide his disdain for the sweating lawyer. "We have a lot of corporate restructuring to do once these funds are secured. Time is money." Sterling scurried over to the glass table, frantically unlatching his briefcase and extracting the freshly drafted transfer mandates. "I assure you, Mr. Gallagher, Miss Davenport, these documents are flawless. The Zurich branch manager is standing by at his private residence for the biometric confirmation." Cecilia approached the wheelchair, the dark ink pad in hand. She didn't bother with the gentle, grieving fiancée routine tonight. Her eyes were hard, sharp, and fixed entirely on the prize. She grabbed Alistair's right hand, roughly pulling his arm from beneath the wool blanket. Alistair remained perfectly still. He offered no resistance, no sudden, terrifying spasms like 2 days prior. He allowed his arm to hang like dead weight. He felt the cold, wet ink press against his thumb, and then felt her firmly press his digit onto the signature line of the thick, textured parchment paper. "There," Cecilia said, hastily wiping his thumb with a wet wipe and dropping his hand back onto his lap with a dismissive thud. "Is that sufficient, Arthur?" Sterling practically pressed his nose to the paper, inspecting the print with a small jeweler's loupe, nodding eagerly. "Perfect. Absolutely perfect. I will scan this into the encrypted portal immediately. The funds, $420 million, will be permanently routed to your designated Swiss accounts within the hour." What neither Cecilia, Christian, nor the sweating, terrified lawyer knew was that Gabriel Hayes had intercepted Sterling's courier earlier that morning in Manhattan. Gabriel hadn't stopped the delivery or destroyed the documents. He had merely swapped the underlying account routing numbers on the physical papers. The $420 million wasn't going to Christian's untraceable Swiss accounts. Instead, the money was currently being routed directly into a series of dummy corporations, secretly controlled by the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, deliberately flagged with Christian's forged digital signature and Cecilia's proxy authorization. By the time Christian tried to access the money, he would be the prime suspect in a massive international money laundering sting, pursued by the federal government and Interpol. Not that Christian would live long enough to see the inside of a federal courtroom, but Alistair was a man who believed in ruining his enemies financially, legally, and physically. Total annihilation. "Excellent," Christian purred, tossing back the rest of his bourbon, the amber liquid burning down his throat. "You can go now, Arthur. Get out of my house. You'll receive your bonus wired by Monday morning." Sterling practically sprinted out of the room, desperate to escape the oppressive, suffocating atmosphere of the estate. As the heavy oak door clicked shut, the tension in the room snapped like a frayed wire. Cecilia let out a triumphant, wicked laugh, throwing her arms around Christian's neck. "We did it. We actually did it. The money is ours. The empire is ours." Christian kissed her hungrily, a possessive hand gripping her waist as he spun her around the room. "I told you, baby. I told you I'd give you the world. Now, there's just one piece of useless trash left to take out before we can truly celebrate." He turned his dark gaze toward the wheelchair. Alistair sat there, a silent, unmoving witness to his own ultimate betrayal. "Go on, then," Christian urged, a cruel, predatory smile spreading across his handsome face as he gestured toward the bed. "Finish it, Cecilia. I want to watch him flatline." Cecilia walked over to her designer leather handbag resting on the velvet sofa. She reached inside and pulled out a small, sterile medical syringe. It was completely empty, the plunger pulled all the way back, filled with nothing but 80 cubic centimeters of deadly, invisible air. "I've been dreaming about this exact moment for 3 years, Cecilia whispered, her stiletto heels clicking slowly, rhythmically against the hardwood floor as she approached the wheelchair. She unscrewed the plastic cap of the syringe with her thumb, her eyes gleaming with a sociopathic thrill. Alistair watched her approach through the veil of his half-closed, supposedly unseeing eyelids. His internal clock was ticking. He calculated the distance with military precision. 5 feet, 4 feet, 3 feet. "Goodbye, Alistair," she sneered, stepping up to the IV pole standing next to his chair. "You were a monster, but you made a beautiful corpse." She reached out, her manicured fingers grasping the plastic port connected directly to the vein in his left arm. She aligned the sharp steel needle of the empty syringe, ready to plunge the lethal bubble of air directly into his bloodstream, an act that would cause a massive, untraceable ischemic stroke within seconds. Outside, the thunder cracked violently, shaking the very foundations of the sprawling estate, masking the sound of what happened next. It was time. Alistair didn't twitch. He didn't spasm. With terrifying, explosive speed, his supposedly paralyzed right hand shot upward like a striking viper. His fingers locked around Cecilia's slender wrist with the crushing force of a steel vise, freezing the lethal needle mere millimeters from his IV port. Cecilia gasped, a high, reedy sound of absolute terror that was instantly swallowed by another deafening crack of thunder outside the Montauk estate. Her lungs paralyzed, she stared down at her wrist, which was now locked in an agonizing, bone-crushing grip. The cold, lifeless hand of the man she had been verbally tormenting for 3 weeks was now practically fusing her radius and ulna together. The empty plastic syringe slipped from her suddenly numb fingers, clattering uselessly onto the polished hardwood floor. Alistair Covington didn't blink. He did not spasm. Slowly, with a terrifying, deliberate grace, his head turned. The vacant, unfocused stare that had convinced Dr. Miller of irreversible brain damage evaporated. In its place was a gaze so sharp, so predatory and so intensely alive that Cecilia felt her knees completely buckle. If he hadn't been holding her up by her wrist, she would have collapsed. "Did you honestly think?" Alistair spoke, his voice a gravelly, rasping whisper from weeks of underuse, yet carrying the booming authority of a judge handing down an execution order. That a cheap car bomb and a street rat from South Boston could end my reign? Christian Gallagher, standing 10 feet away by the fireplace, froze. The crystal bourbon glass slipped through his fingers, shattering against the marble hearth and splashing expensive liquor across his custom leather shoes. His jaw went slack, his eyes bulging as his brain struggled to process the impossible reality standing before him. The dead man was speaking. The vegetable was holding his fiancée hostage. "What?" Christian stammered, his usual swagger entirely erased, replaced by the primal panic of a prey animal. "How?" Alistair squeezed Cecilia's wrist just a fraction harder, eliciting a sharp, pathetic shriek of pain from her lips. With his left hand, he casually reached up and ripped the translucent oxygen tube from beneath his nose. He then grabbed the IV line, patched into his forearm, and tore the needle out of his own vein in one swift, violent motion. A single bead of red welled up, but he ignored it, pushing the heavy medical tray away. "You talk too much, Cecilia," Alistair murmured, looking directly into her panicked, tear-filled eyes. A fatal flaw in a conspirator. You should have checked the room for bugs. Or better yet, you should have made sure the corpse was actually dead before you started confessing to embezzlement, treason, and conspiracy to commit murder. Christian's survival instincts finally broke through his paralysis. His right hand snapped toward the shoulder holster hidden beneath his tailored suit jacket, his fingers wrapping around the grip of his custom Sig Sauer P226. He was fast, but he was dealing with a man who had spent the last 3 weeks doing nothing but rehearsing this exact sequence of movements in the dark. Before Christian could clear the leather holster, Alistair used his leverage on Cecilia's wrist to violently jerk her forward, throwing her directly into Christian's line of sight as a human shield. Simultaneously, Alistair's right hand dove beneath the plush seating cushion of his wheelchair. He bypassed the medical padding and gripped the cold, textured polymer of a suppressed FN-57 tactical pistol that Gabriel had hidden there days prior. Alistair withdrew the weapon and fired twice over Cecilia's shoulder in a fraction of a second. The suppressor hissed, a deadly, mechanical spit. The first armor-piercing round shattered Christian's right collarbone, spinning him violently to the left. The second round tore through his right kneecap. Christian screamed, a raw, guttural sound of pure agony, and collapsed onto the Persian rug. His Sig Sauer clattered across the floor, sliding safely out of reach near the splintered remains of the lawyer's broken clipboard. He writhed on the ground, clutching his shattered leg, his designer suit instantly ruined, gasping for breath as shock set into his nervous system. Alistair slowly pushed himself up from the wheelchair. His legs were stiff from weeks of localized immobility, his muscles protesting the sudden demand for action. But adrenaline and sheer, unadulterated rage fueled him. He stood up to his full 6'2" height, towering over the sobbing, trembling woman cowering before him. He was wearing nothing but silk pajamas, yet he looked more intimidating than any mob boss draped in Armani. "Christian!" Cecilia wailed, her hands hovering over her face as she looked back and forth between her bleeding lover and her resurrected fiancé. She pressed herself against the wall, her chest heaving. "Alistair, please. Please, you don't understand. He forced me. Christian threatened me." Alistair let out a low, humorless laugh that sent chills down her spine. "Save the theatrics, Cecilia. I listened to you both. I listened to you orchestrate my death. I listened to you plan how you would spend my money. I even had the profound displeasure of listening to you sleep with him, not 10 feet from where I was supposedly locked in a coma." He stepped closer to her, the muzzle of the FN-57 angled safely downward. But the threat radiating from him was absolute. You thought you were the architect of my ruin, Alistair whispered, leaning in so close she could smell the sterile, clinical scent of the medical ward still clinging to his skin. You forgot who built the city you were trying to burn. Chaos erupted in the courtyard below, though the heavy soundproofing of the master suite reduced the gunfire to distant, muffled thuds. The storm raged on, lightning flashing through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long, monstrous shadows of Alistair across the bedroom walls. Christian groaned in agony, trying to drag himself backward across the floor using his one good arm, leaving a wet, dark trail across the expensive rug. He glared up at Alistair, his handsome face contorted into a mask of pain and hatred. "You're dead, Covington!" Christian spat, coughing up a spatter of red. My men are outside. There are 20 of them. They heard the shots. They're coming up those stairs right now, and they're going to tear you to pieces." As if on cue, the heavy oak door of the master suite swung open. Cecilia screamed, diving behind an armchair, expecting an influx of heavily armed mercenaries. Instead, Gabriel Hayes stepped calmly into the room. He was dressed in full tactical black gear, a customized Heckler and Coke MP5 submachine gun slung across his chest. His boots were damp from the rain, and his face was entirely impassive. He surveyed the scene, Christian bleeding on the floor, Cecilia cowering, and his boss standing tall. Gabriel reached up to his tactical radio earpiece. "Perimeter is secure, boss. The trash has been removed from the lawn. All 20 of Gallagher's loyalists have been neutralized. The backup ammunition we swapped into their armory magazines performed exactly as expected. They brought blanks to a gunfight." Christian's face drained of all remaining color. The arrogant sneer vanished, replaced by the horrifying realization of total defeat. "Blanks? You swapped their mags?" "I've been awake since the hospital, Christian," Alistair stated coldly, walking slowly toward his former underboss. "Gabriel and I have been dismantling your little coup for 3 weeks. You thought you were infiltrating my home. You were just walking into a cage and locking the door behind you." "The money!" Cecilia suddenly blurted out from behind the armchair, her voice trembling with desperate, manic hope. She clutched her designer handbag as if it were a life-preserver. "The 420 million. Arthur transferred it. The Zurich accounts are in my name. If you kill us, you lose the entire syndicate's liquid fortune. I'll give it back to you, Alistair. I swear. Just let me walk away." Alistair paused, looking at her with an expression of profound pity mixed with absolute disgust. He reached into the pocket of his silk pajamas and pulled out his encrypted smartphone, a device Gabriel had quietly slipped him an hour ago. He tapped the screen a few times, unlocking a secure banking interface, and tossed the phone onto the floor next to Christian's head. "Look at it," Alistair commanded. Christian, grimacing in pain, forced himself to look at the illuminated screen. His eyes scanned the digital receipts, his breathing stopping completely. "That's a routing confirmation from the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Financial Crimes Division in Washington," Alistair explained, his voice echoing in the quiet room. "Arthur Sterling thought he was transferring the funds to your untraceable offshore accounts. In reality, Gabriel intercepted the paperwork. The money was wired directly into a series of federal dummy corporations." Cecilia gasped, crawling out from behind the chair. No, that's impossible. The transfer is flagged with your digital proxy authorization, Cecilia, and Christian's forged biometric countersignatures," Alistair continued mercilessly. "As of 10 minutes ago, the FBI believes you two are the masterminds behind the largest international money laundering operation on the eastern seaboard. You didn't steal my fortune. You just handed the federal government the rope to hang you with. You lost the money just to trap us?" Christian choked out, horrified by the sheer scale of Alistair's vengeance. "You destroyed your own syndicate's capital. Capital can be replaced," Alistair said coldly, raising the pistol slightly. Loyalty cannot. Besides, the board of directors will find out tomorrow that the rogue proxy head, Miss Davenport, acted alone in embezzling the funds before fleeing the country. The Covington family will cooperate fully with the authorities, emerging as the tragic victims of corporate fraud. We'll be legitimate in the eyes of the law. Christian's eyes darted wildly around the room. He looked at Gabriel, blocking the door. He looked at the gun in Alistair's hand. And then he looked at Cecilia. The classic coward's reflex kicked in. "It was her!" Christian yelled, his voice cracking with desperation as he pointed a bloody finger at his lover. "Alistair, I swear to God, she came to me. She manipulated the schedule. She gave me the codes to your armored Cadillac. She wanted you dead so she could take the company public. I was just a pawn." Cecilia stared at him, utterly betrayed. The man who had promised her the world, the man she had kissed over her fiancé's supposedly comatose body, was throwing her to the wolves to save his own skin. "You pathetic lying coward," she shrieked, launching herself at him, her manicured nails aimed at his eyes. Gabriel stepped forward and effortlessly intercepted her, grabbing her by the back of her designer dress and shoving her harshly onto the velvet sofa. She collapsed into a heap of sobbing, ruined elegance. Alistair watched the pathetic display, feeling nothing but a cold, empty void where his love for her used to be. The karma had come full circle, hitting harder than a freight train. "Gabriel," Alistair said, not taking his eyes off Christian. "Bring the cleanup crew up here. It's time to process the garbage and prepare the jet. We have a meeting in Geneva tomorrow to explain a very unfortunate banking error. Betrayal carries a steep price, and Alistair Covington was a meticulous debt collector. The sprawling Montauk estate, previously a stage for a deceptive tragedy, had transformed instantly into a theatre of judgment. Down in the subterranean levels, far below the luxurious marble floors and imported Italian chandeliers, lay a reinforced, soundproof bunker, originally constructed during the Prohibition era. Its concrete walls were thick, damp, and completely impervious to the raging thunderstorm above. Christian Gallagher was strapped securely to a cold, stainless steel medical examination table in the center of the room. His ruined knee and shattered collarbone had been brutally stabilized, not to heal him, but to prevent him from bleeding out before his interrogation was complete. A rogue, off-the-books trauma surgeon, loyal only to Gabriel Hayes, had hastily extracted the armor-piercing bullets without the mercy of anesthesia. Christian's expensive designer suit had been stripped away, replaced by the humiliating vulnerability of his own blood and sweat. He was awake, hyperventilating, and trembling uncontrollably from the shock and the agonizing pain radiating through his nervous system. Cecilia Davenport sat in the corner, violently shivering, her wrists zip-tied tightly to the arms of a heavy iron chair. Her flawless makeup was completely ruined, tracking dark, mascara-stained tears down her pale cheeks. She flinched every time Christian let out a pathetic, muffled groan around the leather bite strap secured between his teeth. The heavy steel door groaned open, and Alistair walked in. He had discarded the silk pajamas, having showered and changed into a perfectly tailored midnight blue Tom Ford suit. He moved with the predatory grace of an apex predator that had just finished a long, satisfying hunt. He leaned heavily on a silver-handled walking cane, a temporary necessity for muscles still recovering from weeks of simulated paralysis, but the cane only added to his terrifying, aristocratic aura. Gabriel followed closely behind him, carrying a thick, leather-bound dossier and a secure, encrypted tablet. "Take the strap out of his mouth," Alistair commanded, his voice cold and devoid of any human empathy. Gabriel stepped forward and yanked the leather strap from Christian's teeth. Christian gasped, coughing violently, his chest heaving as he stared up at the man he had tried to murder. "Alistair, please," Christian wheezed, tears of sheer agony pooling in his eyes. "You won. You proved your point. Just put a bullet in my head and end it." "End it?" Alistair repeated softly, walking over to the steel table and resting both hands on the silver handle of his cane. He leaned over, looking down at his former underboss with eyes like chips of glacial ice. "We haven't even begun, Christian. Death is a privilege you haven't yet earned. You and Cecilia attempted to dismantle a multi-billion-dollar empire. You tried to root my capital into the offshore vaults of Banque Pictet and CA in Geneva. You insulted my intelligence, and worse, you insulted my legacy." Alistair turned his gaze towards Cecilia, who actively shrank back against the iron chair, trying to make herself as small as possible. "You both assumed I operated on brute force alone," Alistair continued, his voice echoing sharply off the concrete walls. "You thought my power was merely physical. You failed to realize that the Covington Syndicate is a corporate machine. While you two were drinking my Dom Perignon and measuring the drapes, Gabriel was employing Kroll, the premier private corporate intelligence firm in the world, to quietly audit every single legitimate front in our organization." Cecilia's head snapped up, her breath hitching in her throat. "Kroll, you brought private federal investigators into the syndicate's books when the accounts are perfectly clean, Cecilia. Investigators are simply accountants." Alistair smiled, a chilling expression that did not reach his eyes. "They identified every single shell corporation you set up. They traced the fraudulent wire transfers. They documented every signature you forged. And more importantly, they identified every single capo, lieutenant, and street soldier who pledged allegiance to Christian over the past 3 weeks. Christian squeezed his eyes shut, letting out a hopeless, guttural sob. The realization washed over him. Alistair hadn't just survived the coup, he had allowed the coup to happen specifically to draw every traitor out into the open light. "I have a list, Christian," Alistair said, gesturing to the heavy dossier in Gabriel's hands. 64 names. 64 men who thought my supposed brain damage was their golden ticket to uncontrolled power. As we speak, my loyalists are visiting their homes, their clubs, and their safe houses. Tonight is a purge of historic proportions, and you two are the guest stars." Cecilia suddenly leaned forward, desperate, her survival instincts kicking in. "Alistair, listen to me. You think you hold all the cards, but you don't. I am not stupid. I knew Christian was a volatile liability. I took out an insurance policy." Alistair slowly turned to face her, raising a single, skeptical eyebrow. "Enlighten me." "I have a dead man's switch," Cecilia spat, a fleeting spark of her old arrogance returning to her tear-stained face. "A highly encrypted solid-state drive hidden in a private vault at a J.P. Morgan branch in Manhattan. It contains the real ledgers, the extortion rackets, the illegal port shipments, the political bribes, everything. If I don't log into a secure server every 48 hours, an automated script will email those files to the New York Times, the FBI, and the district attorney. If you kill me, or if you send me to prison, your entire empire burns to the ground. You need me alive, Alistair. You need me free." Silence stretched across the cold bunker. The only sound was the rhythmic dripping of a condensation pipe in the corner. Alistair stared at her for a long, agonizing moment. Then he looked at Gabriel. Gabriel did not smile, but a glint of dark amusement flashed in his eyes. He reached into his tactical vest, pulled out a small metallic silver rectangle, a solid-state drive, and tossed it casually onto the floor at Cecilia's feet. It clattered sharply against the concrete. Cecilia stared at the drive, her eyes widening in absolute, unadulterated horror. Her jaw went slack. the blood completely drained from her face, leaving her looking like a beautifully dressed corpse. "How?" she whispered, her voice cracking, completely devoid of oxygen. "That was in a biometric vault. Only my thumbprint. Your personal assistant, Chloe, is a remarkably perceptive young woman," Alistair said smoothly, smoothing the lapels of his suit. "She also possesses a deep appreciation for the finer things in life. Gabriel offered her $3 million and a new identity in Monaco. Turns out, acquiring your thumbprint from a discarded wine glass to bypass a localized vault scanner is remarkably simple for a former Tier 1 operator. Your dead man's switch has been disconnected, Cecilia. Your insurance policy is void." Cecilia let out a devastating wail, violently thrashing against the zip ties binding her wrists, but the thick plastic held firm. The realization that she was completely, irrevocably outplayed shattered her mind. She was nothing. She had nothing. Alistair turned back to Christian, who was staring blankly at the ceiling, waiting for the end. "Gabriel," Alistair said, his tone shifting from conversational to ruthlessly professional. "Package them. The FBI task force investigating the fraudulent wire transfers will receive an anonymous tip regarding their location in approximately 2 hours. Leave the evidence of their embezzlement scattered around them. Make sure the federal prosecutors have an airtight case." "Alistair, wait!" Christian begged, straining his neck. "Federal prison, with my knee shattered. The rival families on the inside will butcher me. It's a death sentence. Please, just do it here. Have mercy." "Mercy is for men who stand by their oaths," Alistair replied softly, walking toward the heavy steel door. "You are going to live in a concrete box, Christian. You are going to look over your shoulder every single day, waiting for the shiv to slide between your ribs. And Cecilia will be in a cell across the state, watching her youth and beauty rot away beneath fluorescent lights, knowing she threw away an empire for a fool." Without looking back, Alistair Covington stepped out of the bunker, leaving his betrayers in the dark to face their terrifying, inescapable ruin. Morning broke over Manhattan with a crisp, brilliant clarity, washing away the remnants of the violent storm. High above the bustling city streets, in the penthouse boardroom of the Covington Syndicate's legitimate corporate headquarters, the atmosphere was thick with anxiety. The sprawling, glass-walled room offered a panoramic view of the skyline, a fitting vantage point for the kings of the underworld. Seated around the massive, polished mahogany table were the 7 remaining capos, the old guard. These were hard, ruthless men who controlled the docks, the unions, the casinos, and the construction contracts across the eastern seaboard. They had been summoned for an emergency board meeting by Arthur, the syndicate's sweating, terrified lawyer. Rumors had run rampant through the criminal underworld all night, whispers of massive FBI raids, disappearing lieutenants, and a bloodbath within Christian Gallagher's inner circle. The old men were nervous. They had tolerated Cecilia Davenport and Christian because they believed Alistair was a lost cause, a vegetable waiting to die. They had chosen the path of least resistance to protect their wealth. "Where is she?" demanded Donatello Rossi, an aging boss with a face like weathered leather, tapping his gold lighter impatiently against the table. Davenport called this meeting to finalize the transition. "If she's skipping town with the Treasury, we need to mobilize the street crews immediately." "Patience, Rossi," muttered Vincent Carisi, adjusting his silk tie. "The lawyer said the leadership would address us at 9 sharp. If Christian is making a play for absolute control, we demand a vote." Exactly as the antique grandfather clock in the corner struck 9, the heavy double doors of the boardroom clicked open. The 7 capos turned, expecting to see the elegant, arrogant form of Cecilia Davenport or the swaggering presence of Christian Gallagher. Instead, a profound, suffocating silence fell over the room. Several men stopped breathing entirely, Rossi's gold lighter slipped from his fingers, clattering loudly against the mahogany table. Walking through the doors, flanked by Gabriel Hayes and 4 heavily armed, black-suited security contractors, was Alistair Covington. He did not look like a man who had suffered a catastrophic brain injury. He did not look like a quadriplegic. Dressed in an immaculate, charcoal-grey bespoke suit, his posture straight and unyielding, he looked like the devil himself returning to claim his throne. He carried the silver-handled cane, using it less for support and more as a symbol of brutal authority. Alistair walked slowly to the head of the table, his dark, calculating eyes locking onto each capo, one by one. The sheer terror radiating from the old bosses was palpable. They were looking at a ghost. "Gentlemen," Alistair spoke, his voice deep, clear, and vibrating with absolute command. He took his seat at the head of the table, resting his hands casually on the polished wood. "I apologize for the dramatics. Medical miracles are so rarely punctual." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The shock was absolute. "I am sure you have heard the sirens echoing across the boroughs last night," Alistair continued, his tone dangerously calm. "Let me clarify the situation. My former fiancée, Miss Davenport, and my former underboss, Mr. Gallagher, attempted a hostile takeover. They orchestrated the bombing of my vehicle and colluded to embezzle $420 million from our legitimate holdings." Alistair paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. They were sloppy. They were arrogant. And, as of 4 o'clock this morning, they are currently in the custody of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, facing multiple life sentences for international corporate fraud and racketeering. Rossi finally found his voice, though it trembled. "Boss, Alistair, we were told you were gone. We were told your mind was destroyed. The Dr. Miller was heavily compensated to provide a narrative that suited my needs," Alistair interrupted smoothly. "I needed to know who would stand by my bedside and who would reach for my wallet while I was supposedly sleeping. The results of my little sociological experiment were deeply disappointing." Alistair leaned forward, the temperature in the room seemingly dropping 10 degrees. 64 men chose treason over loyalty over the past 3 weeks. As of this morning, those 64 men have been permanently removed from the chessboard. Gabriel has their territories secured. The old code is reinstated immediately. There will be no narcotics, no human trafficking, and no unauthorized violence in my city. We operate in the shadows, with discipline and honor." He stood up, picking up his silver cane. "I understand that transitions of power can create confusion. Therefore, I am wiping the slate clean for the 7 of you. You protected your families, and you kept the peace while I was indisposed. But understand this." Alistair's eyes darkened into obsidian voids, burning with a lethal promise. "I came back from the dead once to root out the rot in my empire. Do not ever give me a reason to do it again. The next man who doubts me will not be handed over to the federal government. He will simply vanish. Are we absolutely clear?" "Crystal clear, boss," Carisi stammered, bowing his head deeply in submission. The other capos quickly followed suit, murmuring their absolute loyalty, their eyes fixed firmly on the table. The rebellion was completely crushed. The syndicate was unified under an iron grip tighter than ever before. Alistair Covington turned and walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the sprawling metropolis of New York City. The sun caught the edges of the skyscrapers, casting long, triumphant shadows across the concrete canyons. He had paid a heavy price in blood, pain, and heartbreak, but the reward was absolute sovereignty. He was no longer just a mafia boss. He was a myth. He was the king who could not be killed, the titan who ruled from the shadows, watching over an empire built on the shattered bones of those who dared to betray him. Wow, What an incredible journey into the dark and treacherous world of the Covington Syndicate. Alistair's ultimate revenge proves that true power lies in patience, intelligence, and the absolute refusal to become a victim. Betrayal is a dangerous game, and Cecilia learned the hard way that you should never underestimate a king, even when he appears broken. The dramatic twists, the high-stakes financial warfare, and the satisfying karma make this a story you won't easily forget. If you loved this intense, twist-filled saga of mafia romance, betrayal, and ultimate retribution, please hit that like button right now. Share this incredible story with your friends who love dark, suspenseful drama, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss another thrilling audio narrative. Drop a comment below telling us your favorite plot twist. See you in the next video.